Hi, I'm Lou and this is Lily Rowe. So part of the forest school qualification in the UK is to understand about different woodland types. So we're here at Foxley Wood in Norfolk, which is an ancient woodland, and we thought we could show you around and explain some of the features of this type of woodland. So first of all, let's just explain some of the vocabulary that we're using. So as I say, it's an ancient woodland. Now in England, that means that there's been woodland here continuously since the 1600s. So at least 400 years worth of woodland. And now that's because anything before 1600s most likely was here naturally, as in through the natural process of succession, rather than being planted. So it was after the medieval period of history that things started to be planted in terms of tree timber plantations and things like that. It's also that period in history where the maps were perhaps more reliable. So if something's called an ancient woodland in England, Wales or Northern Ireland, it means that it's been here since 1600s. I believe it's slightly different in Scotland. It's 1700 and something in Scotland. So that's what that term means. So then in terms of a few more definitions, so I talk about this woodland being naturally succeeded, as in the process of succession created the woodland rather than it being planted by humans. And also we're going to be talking about native species. So these are types of plants or animals that have been here for a very long time, since before the English Channel was formed. Anything that has appeared in this country since that point we describe as non-native, and that means it's usually been introduced by humans. So Foxley Wood is the biggest ancient woodland that we have here in Norfolk, and it's owned by the charity the Norfolk Wildlife Trust. It's actually a National Nature Reserve and a SSSI, so it is protected under law because of the rarity of the habitats and the species here. According to the Woodland Trust, only 2.5% of the UK is ancient woodland, and half of that is what's known as PAWS, P-A-W-S, which is plantations on ancient woodland sites, which means that trees got planted on top of where there was originally ancient woodland, and that actually happened here, and the Norfolk Wildlife Trust has been restoring it and removing the non-native conifers that were planted on top of some of the sections here. So let's consider some of the features of this particular type of woodland. Firstly, the vertical structure of the woodland. So as we look around, there are all four ecological layers present of this woodland. So we've got a canopy layer with big tall trees with their uppermost branches forming that canopy. We've got an understory or shrub layer, which are the trees that are the bushier kind of shrubby type species. And then we've got the field layer, which is the ground plants, and we've got the ground layer itself, comprising of the soil and what's very close to the soil or even underground. So we've got a diversity of species in all of those layers. So the canopy type trees, we've got oaks, we've got ash, we've got birch. In some of the wetter areas I've seen some willow and alder as well as we've been walking around, and they are all jumbled up, they're mixed together, they're not blocks of oak and blocks of birch separate, they've kind of all mixed as they've naturally occurred here. Then coming down to the understory layer, or the shrub layer, as we're just going underneath here, we've got a lot of hazel. So this woodland has been traditionally coppiced, which we'll maybe talk about in a little bit later. So there's lots of sections of hazel, but it's not just hazel. We've seen some holly, and along the rides we've seen some Guelder rose, some hawthorn in the more open areas. So it's a mix, but they're all native species. Then as we come down to the the flower level, the field layer, we are seeing lots of native sort of classic woodland plants. So we've got bluebells, we've got wood anemones, wood sorrel, we've got sanicle, yellow pimpernel, yellow archangel. Down the rides we've got things like pignut, stitchwort appearing. So a real kind of mix of wildflowers. Apparently they've recorded over 350 flowering plant species on this site alone, so huge diversity in the number and types of plants. Then coming down to the ground layer, the soil is very rich and full of nutrients from the annual dump of leaves that it will get from the predominantly deciduous plant species around it and tree species, and so we see lots of insects, lots of insect life. Earthworms will be busy burrowing through the soil, and even though we are on quite sandy ground here in Norfolk, because this woodland's been here so long, it might have started with more pioneering species like the birches that can cope with those sort of more acidic sandy soils, but over time it will have changed the soil composition to be a more neutral soil that other species can grow in. So very rich, lovely soils. In terms of horizontal structure of the woodland, it's non-uniform because it's developed through the process of succession and natural regeneration, as opposed to being planted here by humans. So that means there's a mix of ages of tree and a mix of different species of tree, and that the horizontal pattern varies, with some areas being very dense and other areas being much more sparse. And so natural events would influence this. So for example, if there's been a storm and some trees have fallen over, that will create a glade, so a sunnier spot where the young sapling trees that might be growing there will suddenly all rush up and fight for the light, so that they can be the next canopy species. So there really is a mix of age groups and species present. This is very different in contrast to a plantation type woodland, where everything would be very uniform because it'll be the same type of tree planted all in straight lines, all at the same time. So much more diverse than a plantation. Another aspect to this woodland system's horizontal structure is that there are lots of edges, and edges are another good thing for diversity. So these edges might be created by humans, they might be man-made, or they could be natural. So for example, the moisture levels here varies, I've noticed, and there are systems of streams and ditches that run through the woodland. So that's an edge in terms of moisture levels that will affect the plants that will kind of grow there. Then an example of a human-made one is rides and ride management. So rides being pathways that are cut through the woodlands and that are maintained usually by mowing each year. And what that does is it kind of restarts the process of succession, and it increases the number of habitats that are present, and therefore the biodiversity of the system. So lots of edges increases biodiversity. So this non-uniform horizontal structure, combined with the number of edges it has, combined with that really high biodiversity, makes this system really stable and robust. So what I mean by that is that if there was a pest or a disease to be introduced to, say, one of the tree species, then it wouldn't be the end of the world. It might kill off a few individuals, but it's unlikely to spread like wildfire because Yeah, because there's a mix of ages and species and stages of growth and edges to the system. It means that a pest cannot kind of spread rapidly and take over. So diversity equals stability when it comes to ecology. So why is this woodland so diverse in species? So there are several reasons. So firstly, most of the native broadleaf trees are deciduous. So that means they drop their leaves every autumn. But what that means is there's a period of time in the year through winter and early spring where the light can reach the forest floor because there aren't a canopy of leaves blocking that out. So the ground plants really make the most of this and suck up all that energy and flower very early in the season. Usually April, beginning of May is the best time to go to a woodland to see the wildflowers. And so their life cycles have adapted and evolved to work with a deciduous woodland system. Also, because they're native species, species that have been here a very, very long time will have complex ecological relationships with other species. So where there's native plants, there'll be native animal species, insects, butterflies, mammals, all around that are connected to that somehow through food chains or food chains. Thanks, Bubs. Food chains or reciprocal relationships in some way. And what I notice here is there is an abundance of insect life, which of course is the foundation of a food chain. You know, we've seen more food chain. We've seen lots of caterpillars and spiders, butterflies, all sorts of creatures all over the place. Sometimes in the sunny weather conditions you can actually literally hear them buzzing, like the whole woodlands buzzing. So yeah, native species equals a lot of biodiversity. We've also noticed here that a lot of dead wood has been left in the system rather than being harvested and removed. So I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that for a woodland ecosystem to be healthy, you need at least like 30% dead wood, because that's a really rich habitat for invertebrate species, and therefore birds will eat the insects and so on and so forth in that complex food web. So finally, there is also the element of time, something that you can't shortcut. I think I read on the internet somewhere that they believe that parts of this woodland are up to 6,000, thank you, 6,000 years old. So, you know, it's been woodland for a very, 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 very long time. And because of that, the changes within and because of that, because of the unique set of conditions that a woodland has, that certain plant species, because they are so slow to move and colonise new areas, they can indicate the age of a woodland. They're called ancient woodland indicator species. And so when there's been a woodland for many hundreds of years, certain species might be associated with it, which you wouldn't get in younger woodlands. So it is possible to age your woodland by the flowers, the wildflowers and the ferns, and even some of the lichens and mosses, I think, as well. As I understand it, it does vary on region to region. So some species are ancient indicator species in the southwest, whereas they might not be up north in Scotland, for example. So there is different species that fulfill this. But for example, some of the ones that I've seen here today, we've got bluebells, we've got wood anemones and wood sorrel, yellow pimpernel, I think, might be one as well. So the flowers are telling us that there's been woodland here a long time. In terms of how this site's being managed and looked after, it's clear that they are coppicing, and perhaps have restarted coppicing. So coppicing is a form of woodland management that they believe has happened since the Neolithic times. So even our Stone Age ancestors kind of coppiced. And it's a way of basically using the tree's natural inclination to grow to harvest a supply of straight poles. So when you cut any broadleaf tree, you don't kill it, it will regrow, but it will regrow multi-stemmed because lots of buds will form and send up shoots. And so coppicing is a way of using this natural kind of process of trees so that instead of harvesting one big fat trunk, you'll get lots and lots of small thin trunks. And of course that would have been vital for people's survival in the past in terms of making wattle and daub houses and fences, making tools, making charcoal, firewood supplies. Basically, wood was really important to us before the dawn of plastic. It was what we used. So coppicing has been happening a very long time. So if this woodland is as old as they say it is, it's likely that it was coppiced in the past by our ancestors. So often coppicing today is done more for conservation reasons rather than for product reasons, because there's not the same sort of demand for woodland products as there once was. And the reason why coppicing is great for conservation is it creates a mosaic of different woodland habitats within one woodland. So the way that the management system works is that you take your big section of woodland and you divide it into smaller sections called cubes. And then each of those sections gets cut on rotation. So if you imagine in the first year, all the hazel understory gets cut in section 1 and then left, and then same in section 2 and left next year, and then so on and so forth. So each year you only cut one section. Historically, the time span would have been dictated by the products that you wanted to grow. So for example, walking sticks and thatching spars would have been thinner diameter than structural timbers that you'd need to leave to grow a bit longer. So this creates like a jigsaw puzzle of different habitat types. If you imagine in the first year when the trees are cut, it's very sunny, open, great for insects and the wildflowers. But then as the trees grow, you create like a thicket that's very dense, great for birds wanting to nest. Species like dormice, although we don't have them in Norfolk, but other parts of the country do, great for that. And then as it gets bigger, it opens up like the habitat that's behind me now, which is easier to move through. Again, the wildflowers are there because there's more open spaces. There'll be deer and foxes, other mammals, and of course some dead wood in the system as well. So the insects and the bird life associated with that will also be present. Another aspect of management that we've noticed here is that they're obviously trying to control deer numbers. So there's evidence here that there would have been a deer fence probably when they first coppiced an area. They wanted to protect it from too much grazing pressure. So perhaps one of the most efficient ways of doing it would be to put a deer fence around it. I've also noticed a number of high seats which are used to basically sit up with your rifle and wait for the deer to pass to cull them. So grazing pressure from deer is one of the biggest pressures on UK woodlands, because there are no natural predators of the deer anymore. We don't have wolves here anymore that would control the deer numbers naturally, combined with a lot of non-native species like the muntjac deer, which breeds all year round and is quite prolific in number. So unfortunately, sometimes culling might be one of the only strategies in terms of controlling deer. Either that or reintroduce the wolves, which that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? In terms of other types of management, we've noticed that there are sections where they've put livestock in these woodlands to create a wood pasture type habitat. So the grazing action of those animals stops the process of succession and can stop like the natural regeneration of the woodland. So you end up with more open glade type habitats instead of dense woodland cover. So again, it's kind of like a patchwork of habitats. Also having livestock creates micro habitats in their like hoof prints and in their poo as well, kind of creates their own little micro habitats. They've also managed their rides, which are the pathways cut through the woodland. I'm guessing that these are probably mown rather than grazed. And so having pathways or rides cut through woodlands again creates a different type of habitat where there's light reaching the floor all year round, and so again great for wildflower species and therefore butterfly species, and birds of prey like sparrowhawks often use rides to hunt through and things as well. So yeah, they're obviously carefully managing this site to protect its diversity. So we wanted to show you a second example of a broadleaf woodland. So we've come over to Blickling Estate and we found a patch of mixed broadleaf woodland, and the bluebells are out, which are very, very beautiful. Yeah, however, this woodland isn't quite as natural as the one that we've just looked at Foxley Woods. I confess I don't actually know the detailed history of the land here, of the land, so I'm making just some best guesses based on what I can observe. So as you can see, Lily Rowe is going to take a deeper exploration into the ground plants. Yes, Bubs, do you see the bluebells? So the bluebells suggest that there has been woodland here for some time. There are also some other species like yellow archangel and pignuts I've seen in the rides as well, which would suggest that there has been woodland here for some time. However, there is also a lot of like bracken kind of here, which makes me wonder whether if at some time it was like a coniferous plantation as well. Now, we do have quite sandy soils here in Norfolk, which would mean that the soil would be acidic, so that might affect the ability of some species to grow here. However, I have seen some evidence of like selective felling here, where there might have been conifers growing and have been removed. In terms of the broadleaf species, we've got some oaks here, but the way that they look to me suggests is that they were planted. They are in straight lines rather than sort of natural regeneration. They look probably roughly around 100 years old, so maybe 100 years ago they planted some of these oaks. However, there is evidence of natural regeneration with younger oaks kind of coming up. I've also noticed that there are some individual big sweet chestnuts which look older than the oak trees to me. So again, whether they were there as a plantation for the estate, like a firewood plantation perhaps, from long ago, I'm not sure. But it is clear that natural regeneration is taking place. And of course, even though it is possibly a plantation, the fact that it's not very dense means that there is dappled sunlight. There are patches of sunlight that are able to reach the forest floor all year round, and perhaps because there was woodland here before this more managed woodland, the soil and the seed bank of the more traditional wildflowers is still present and therefore able to I guess regenerate, even if there was some coniferous plantation in between the broadleaf times. So we are seeing all four vertical layers of the woodlands still here. We've got the canopy layer, we've got the understory layer, and we have got a wildflower field layer, and of course the ground layer here. Although perhaps some of the species present in the wildflower layer are more limited than the more natural type of woodland. the understory layer, we have got things like hawthorns and rowan, and I have noticed that there is some sycamore here as well, and of course sycamore being not a native species. I believe sycamore was introduced by the Normans, which that can cause problems sometimes in a system, because as we know, the helicopter seeds of the sycamore tree are very, very successful in terms of colonising new areas, so they can spread very, very easily. And because they've got big palmate leaves that come out relatively early in the season, they can sometimes be a problem in terms of shade, causing too much shade for the wildflowers underneath. So there are non-native species present in this woodland. They haven't removed them all, as opposed to perhaps the more nature reserve type of woodland where non-native species might be completely removed. Something else we've noticed in this woodland there are some high seats that are used by gamekeepers to control deer numbers. So that would suggest that there is management taking place in this woodland. So this woodland, not quite as natural as the previous one, however it's still a mixed broadleafed woodland that obviously has a lot of wildlife value in terms of the species present and some very beautiful bluebells and wildflowers. Yeah, which would suggest that there is also still those complex food webs associated with the plant life. Where there's a mix of plants, there's going to be a mix of animal species and therefore a mix of predators. And we certainly on a sunny day like today can see the buzzing abundance of insect life. Yeah, and we can hear a variety of different woodland birds singing. Yeah, so there is some complex interactions happening. However, it might not be just completely as natural as the previous Foxley woodland that we looked at, which is perhaps being managed even more carefully than this one. I guess it depends on your opinion, but more carefully managed. However, I always find woodlands like this really hopeful, because if they've been affected negatively by humans in terms of perhaps there were coniferous trees planted on top of where there previously was natural woodland, I always find it really reassuring when you see the wildflowers coming back and knowing that the seeds of the wildflowers can stay dormant in the soil for hundreds and hundreds of years, and then just given a chance, you know, the opening up the canopy, creating more broadleaf opportunities here, and that's all they need, and then they'll spring back to life through the process of succession. I find it very, very hopeful. And you know, nature will survive till long after we're gone. Yeah. What's your experience of natural broadleaf woodland or even ancient woodland? Do let us know in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video, do give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel so you can join us again in the woods next time. And thanks for watching.